Hey guys, this is going to be the second video on preterism that I spoke about doing, and it's going to take me a while to do the Gog Magog one, because I think that's the other important thing to look at. But this is just a negative case against preterism, some of the things that I think still need to happen, and I really won't be presenting any positive views for any other belief. There is a little section, an interesting article that I found on futurism, and I hate these titles, but just to give you some of the points as far as the history is concerned, because there are so many views: idealism, historicism, futurism, preterism, spiritualism. There's so many ways to look at this. Um, but these are the things I think that are problematic anyway to preterism, as far as saying that everything has been fulfilled anyway. So let's get started here. All right, the first thing is the ingathering of the Jews. Isaiah 11:11 through 12. In that day the Lord will extend his hand yet a second time to recover the remnant that remains of his people from Assyria, from Egypt, from Pathros, from Cush, from Elam, from Shinar, from Hamath, and from the coastlands of the sea. He will raise a signal for the nations and will assemble the banished of Israel and gather the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth. Isaiah 27:12 through 13. In that day, from the river Euphrates to the brook of Egypt, the Lord will thresh out the grain, and you will be gleaned one by one, O people of Israel. In that day a great trumpet will be blown, and those who were lost in the land of Assyria and who were driven out of the land of Egypt will come to worship the Lord on the holy mountain at Jerusalem. Jeremiah 23:7 through 8. Therefore, behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when they shall no longer say, as the Lord lives, who brought people of Israel out of the land of Egypt, but as the Lord lives, who brought up the land of the offspring of the house of Israel out of the north country, and out of all the countries where he had driven them. They shall dwell in their own land. Jeremiah 33:7. I will restore the fortunes of Judah and the fortunes of Israel and rebuild them as they were at first. Now, in history, they've always been occupied after these times, even during the time of Jesus. So, and it is even to this day, really, with the mosques being there and the temple missing still. Another thing is the third temple, Ezekiel 37:26 through 28. I will make a covenant of peace with them. It shall be an everlasting covenant with them. And I will set them in their land and multiply them, and will set my sanctuary in their midst forevermore. My dwelling place shall be with them, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. Then the nations will know that I am the Lord who sanctifies Israel, when my sanctuary is in their midst forever. So, to me, that's another tough one. There's no spiritual way of looking at this in the Old Testament anyway. It's a literal thing. I don't think there's not land in heaven. I would presume that would have to be an example to non-believers. And the dwelling place in the time of Ezekiel would have clearly been the temple. And everyone knew what he was talking about, and everyone knew, then the nations will know that I am the Lord. What nations are there in heaven? Is there, you see what I mean? It just doesn't make any sense. Micah 4. And just to give you a warning, I've tried to break this down to very concise points within the Messianic Age, but a lot of this stuff is gonna intertwine with each other. So you're gonna come to some of the same passages or same chapters, but in different parts. Micah 4:1 through 2. It shall come to pass in the latter days that the mountain of the house of the Lord shall be established as the highest of the mountains, and it shall be lifted up above the hills, and peoples shall flow to it. And many nations shall come and say, Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us his ways, and that we may walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law, and the and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. So, I mean, they all knew what Jerusalem was. They all knew what Zion was. And I'm just going to stay on track here. Isaiah 2, verses 2 through 3. It shall come to pass in the latter days that the mountain of the house of the Lord shall be established as the highest of the mountains, and shall be lifted up above the hills, and all the nations shall flow to it. Again, I don't know what nations would be in heaven right now. And many people shall come and say, people, not spirits, shall come and say, Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us his ways, and that we may walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go the law, and from the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. The time of peace that needs to come. Ezekiel 37:26. I will make a covenant of peace with them. It shall be an everlasting covenant with them, and I shall set them in their land and multiply them, and will set my sanctuary in their midst forever. In their midst. And it's not talking about them going somewhere else to be in his midst. It's in their midst. And it says in their land. Biblically speaking, there is only one land with the Jewish people. It's the land of Israel, the Jewish land. Micah 4:3. He shall judge between many peoples and shall decide for strong nations far away. So, what nations are far away in heaven? And they shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more. So, were there swords and stuff in heaven when this resurrection took place? Are they living in some spiritual land where this prophecy has come true? And more importantly, then neither shall they learn war anymore. To me, it's pretty straightforward. It's saying that the people now, as we know them, and what use do pruning hooks and plowshares and whatnot. But Isaiah 2:4, he shall judge between the nations, and he shall decide disputes for many peoples, and they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. And here we are again. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation. How many nations are there in the spiritual kingdom of heaven, first of all? Second of all, the preterist has already gotten rid of the Jewish people, remember? That is a very popular position in preterism, and there's other problems with trying to deal with specific positions in preterism, as you'll see in Revelations 11. But to me, this would just be redundant. Nation shall not lift up sword. So there's other nations that are not Israel. That is the point here. And to the preterist, there is no Jew. There is no. This doesn't make any sense. Isaiah 11:6-9. The wolf shall dwell with the lamb, and the leopard shall lie down with the young goat, and the calf and the lion, and the fattened calf together, and the little children shall lead them. The cow and the bear shall graze. Their young shall lie down together. The lion shall eat straw like the ox. The nursing child shall play over the hole of the cobra, and the weaned child shall put its hand in the adder's den. They shall not hurt or destroy in all my holy mountain. Again, however you want to take this passage, if you want to take it literal, and what is obviously has not happened yet here, okay, because this is an eternal peace that's supposed to be put in. And second of all, if you don't take it literal and you use it as a metaphoric thing, basically saying that the other possibility is that the nations aren't warring with each other anymore. And it says in verse 9, they shall not hurt or destroy in all my holy mountain. We know where that mountain is. It is not somewhere else, anywhere in the Bible. That holy mountain is here. Then we come to the knowledge of God. Isaiah 2:3, and many people shall come and say, come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, and he may teach us his ways, and that we may walk in his path. For out of Zion shall go the law, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. We know what Zion and Jerusalem is, because that is one thing you can't move. You can't move Zion, can you? Isaiah 11:1 through 9. There shall come forth a shoot from the stump of Jesse, and a branch from his root shall bear fruit. And the Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him, and the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, and the Spirit of counsel and might, and the Spirit of knowledge and the fear of the Lord. And his delight shall be in the fear of the Lord. He shall not judge by what he sees, or decide disputes by what he hears. But with righteousness he shall judge the poor, and decide with equity for the meek of the earth. He shall strike the earth with the rod of his mouth, and the breath of his lips shall kill the wicked. Righteousness shall be the belt of his waist, and faithfulness the belt of his loins. And then you get to it again. The wolf shall dwell with the lamb, and the leopard shall lie down with the young goat, and the calf and the lion and the fattened calf together, and a little child shall lead them. The cow and the bear shall graze, the young shall lie down together, the lion will eat straw like the ox. The nursing child will play with the hole of the cobra, the wean, etc., etc. And then you get down to the part that matters. It says, the nursing child shall play with the hole of the cobra, and the weaning child shall put his hand in the adder's den. They shall not hurt or destroy in all my holy mountain, for the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. And what that's talking about clearly is not just people hearing the name God or Yahovah, or people will believe him. They will believe God exists. They will follow his words and his teachings. Isaiah 40:1 through 5. Comfort my people, says your God. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem and cry to her that the warfare is ended, that the iniquity is pardoned, that she has received from the Lord's hand double for all her sins. A voice cries in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord, make straight the path in the desert highway of our God. Each valley shall be lifted up, and every hill will be made low. The uneven ground shall become level, the rough places a plain. And the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken. So here we see one of these, and they're all over the Old Testament. They're twice applied passages and split passages. If you believe in Isaiah 9:6, you believe in Emmanuel, you believe in the virgin birth passages. These are all things that the writers in Hebrews, these are all things that went two ways. Okay, and this one, it says all flesh shall see it together. And like I said, you can spiritualize it if you want, but it says flesh. Not all spirits will see it together. These are things that are supposed to happen after the Messianic Age is instituted. Zephaniah 3:9. For at that time I will change the speech of the peoples to a pure speech. And what he's getting at there is saying that basically the blaspheming of God is going to stop. That all of them may call upon the name of the Lord and serve him with one accord. Because you got to remember, there is no the soul and all these other little teachings that you have to kind of piece together with preterism. It's not taught in the Old Testament. And this pure speech is talking about the ceasing of the blaspheming of his name. So that does not happen. Okay? And as far as if you're going to say it happened in heaven, then it hasn't happened since 70 AD. No one has blasphemed his name in heaven because there's no devil, there's no demons, none of this stuff exists anymore. Doesn't make sense. And if you take a look at Jeremiah 31 in its whole, you will see the outcome of this covenant. But for now, we'll just go to 31:34. And no longer shall each one teach his neighbor and each his brother, saying, Know the Lord, for they shall all know me, from the least of them to the greatest, declares the Lord. For I will forgive their iniquity, and I will remember their sin no more. Well, right now, at this very moment, he's remembering people's sins. Okay? Even in the preterist view, when you die, you're going to go one place or the other, forever, apparently. So again, you read Jeremiah 31 in context. This is not speaking of some heavenly fulfillment. This is speaking of what's going to happen in Israel and the world at the time of the Messianic Age. And knowledge of the Lord is not all over the earth right now, plainly, and no one serves him of one accord. We've seen that. And people still have to teach their neighbor and their brother. Now, this is funny because when you stop to think about it, if there's no more Jew or Gentile, no more male or female, this brother term is not applying to a brother in Christ. It's applying to someone's literal blood brother. There are no brothers and sisters in heaven in that sense. Everyone's one people. This is not talking about, oh, brother so-and-so, brother. This is the blood term. This is a fleshly term. It is not a spiritual term. Micah 4:5, for all the peoples walk each in the name of its God, but we will walk in the name of the Lord our God forever and ever. This has not happened yet. Zechariah 14:9, and the Lord will be king over all the earth. On that day the Lord will be one and his name one. Has not happened. Okay? God right now is not acknowledged as the king of the earth. And as far as if you try to push that to the 70 AD markers, like what was he before then? And Jesus and the Unitarian understanding is not God. His name is not one. And he's not king over all the earth, because that would tie in back to these other passages at the time of peace, at the time of listening. No more explaining who God is. Everyone's going to know. And you get the impression when you start knitting all these together, it seems like people might still be born. And that's one of the things about Gog and Magog. It seems like outside of the 1,400-mile temple, there's people still born. But that's a talk for another day. And then overall, this whole age can best be summed up in Ezekiel 37:24-28. Excuse me, I'm tired. My servant David shall be king over them. Okay, so we're thinking of Jesus now. And they shall all have one shepherd. Hasn't happened. They shall walk in my rules and be careful to obey my statutes. They shall dwell in the land that I gave to my servant Jacob. Heaven was not given to the servant Jacob. Israel was given to Jacob. Where your fathers lived. Okay, so if there's any doubt, the fathers lived in Israel. Israel was given to Jacob. They and their children and their children's children shall dwell there forever. Has not happened. And David my servant shall be their prince forever. Has not happened. I will make a covenant of peace with them. It shall be an everlasting covenant with them, and I will set them in their land. Possessive, their land. And multiply them, and will set my sanctuary, their temple, in their midst forever. My dwelling place shall be with them, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. Then the nations will know that I am Lord who sanctifies Israel, when my sanctuary is in their midst forevermore. So the sanctuary is going to be surrounded by other nations that are not Israel forever. None of this has happened. None of it. This has not come to pass. Jesus is not king over the Jewish people. And see, that's where the big problem comes in. The way the preterist gets around this is to simply say, there's no more Jews. So who's Jesus going to be the king of? And that's why I would take a look at Paul, because he was not a full preterist. It was impossible because he died before 70 AD. Pay careful attention to what he says about being grafted in to Israel. The land promises, and it's funny when you look at some of these other debates about the law and this and that. Like I said, that certain law, whatever the law turns out to be at the third temple, that's what's going to be expected of everybody, period. Now, when the temple comes, it's going to be surrounded by other nations, number one. Where their fathers lived is another clue. They lived in Israel. And he says they will be their God and will be their people. Well, if my servant David shall be king over them, and they shall all have one shepherd. And like I said, I contest the Jewish people still exist today, plainly. Jesus is not their shepherd. At least the people who are living here right now. Jesus is not their shepherd. And these things, the peace, the knowledge, and all that, this is not taking place. And it's plain. This is not a spiritualized text. It's very straightforward and very plain. This is a land promise that has to be fulfilled because it was made to Abraham, just like the promise of Jesus was made to Abraham. And this is literal land language. This is plain. The fathers didn't live in heaven. Okay? And I don't know exactly, I haven't read some preterism points in a while. I haven't read what they do with people that died before Jesus. Did they go straight to heaven? I don't know how all this works. That was not their understanding in the Old Testament for sure. So they didn't think their fathers were living per se in heaven. I think it's pretty straightforward. When Sheol swallowed them up, it's the earth. So Ezekiel 37:24-28 pretty much sums it up. And there are some things left for Jesus to do. Take a look at Matthew 24:22. And if those days had not been cut short, no human being would be saved. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be cut short. First of all, it seems the Romans did just fine and were in no threat of not surviving. And the other point, and like I said, it says no human being. I mean, that's just a straight blanket statement. No human being. It was not that kind of event. Okay, it just wasn't. The wars we've had after that have been 10 times worse. And I think that kind of hints to the fact you may need to have the ability to basically destroy all of mankind, which I'm not saying we're here now. I'm not saying anything. I'm not saying this is going to happen in my lifetime. I'm not one of those people. I'm more worried about what I'm doing instead of what I'm waiting for. But what I'm saying is it seems to inflect that you would have to have the ability to do it. Then take a look at Mark 13:32-37. But concerning that day or that hour, no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. Be on guard, keep awake, for you do not know when the time will come. It is like a man going on a journey, when he leaves home and puts his servants in charge, each with his work, and commands the doorkeeper to stay awake. Therefore stay awake, for you do not know when the master will come, in the evening, or at midnight, or when the rooster crows, or in the morning, lest he come suddenly and find you asleep. And what I say to you, I say to all, stay awake. Matthew 24:36. But concerning that day or hour, no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father only. So based on Jesus' words, I don't think Jesus could have exactly known about 70 AD per se. It would seem a Trinitarian could say Jesus knew this in his divine nature. As someone who does not believe that Jesus is God, I do find this much harder to believe. I'm not saying that he could have not been speaking of the events to come, just not knowing when. However, in light of the Old Testament, I would leave the door open as the judgment that came first in 70 AD, if that is indeed the case, that it could have a future sense to the people that were meant to understand it. And once again, this is a common theme that we find in the Old Testament. Every single passage about Jesus in the Old Testament, I'd say at least 95% of them are twice applied. There's no way around it. You take Isaiah 9:6, it applies to Hezekiah. You take the psalmist in Hebrews, he's talking about either Solomon or David. And you see what I mean? There's almost all of them have two applications, a present application and a second application that's revealed in wisdom at a later time. And I don't know why people close the door on this in the New Testament, like it's not a possibility that this continues. If 70 AD is just a metaphor for the final judgment, it's quite possible. You have the example. I don't know. I'm not asserting that that is true. I'm just saying Jesus himself could not have known about 70 AD. He said he didn't. He didn't know the day nor the hour. And that doesn't mean he didn't. He knew the year, but he didn't. That's what the term is getting at. And that's why I laugh at these idiots that predict the end of the world. They say, well, I don't know what day it is or week, but I can tell you what year it's going to be. That's what the statement is saying. It's saying that nobody knows. And that would have to include Jesus. And then we'll take a look at, excuse me, Luke 21:7. And they asked him, Teacher, when will these things be, and when will the sign of these things, what will be the sign that these things are about to take place? Then you go to Luke 21:20 and 22. But when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know it is then know that its desolation has come near. Then let those who are in Judea flee into the mountains, and let those who are inside the city depart, and let not those who are out in the country enter it. For these are the days of vengeance, to fulfill what is written. And what I'm getting at here is that this is something that could realistically be fulfilled today. Now that, at least given in a span of time, if the Jewish people do in fact find a way to expel the Muslims, or something happens, because they're back now. They're back in Israel. That's the weird part about all of this. They're back. But if you take Luke 21:7, Luke 21:20 and 22, and then we take a look at Zechariah 12:2-5. Behold, I am about to make Jerusalem a cup of staggering to all the surrounding peoples. The siege of Jerusalem will also be against Judah. On that day I will make Jerusalem a heavy stone for all peoples. All who lift it will surely hurt themselves. And all the nations of the earth will gather against it. On that day, declares the Lord, I will strike every horse with panic and its rider with madness. But for the sake of the house of Judah, I will keep my eyes open when I strike every horse of the peoples with blindness. Then the clans of Judah shall say to themselves, the inhabitants of Jerusalem have strength through the Lord of hosts, their God. Then we go to verse 9. And on that day I will seek to destroy all the nations that come against Jerusalem. You will find a reference to the plain of Megiddo in verse 11. Then we go to Zechariah 14:1-9. Behold, a day is coming for the Lord, when the spoil taken from you will be divided in your midst. For I will gather all nations against Jerusalem to battle, and the city shall be taken, and the houses plundered, and the women raped. Half of the city shall go into exile, but the rest of the people shall not be cut off from the city. Then the Lord will go out and fight against those nations as when he fights on the day of battle. On that day his feet shall stand on the Mount of Olives that lies before Jerusalem on the east, and the Mount of Olives shall split in two from east to west by a very wide valley, so that one half of the mount shall move northward, the other half southward. And you shall flee the valley of my mountains, for the valley of the mountains shall reach Azal. And you shall flee as you fled from the earthquake in the days of Uzziah, king of Judah. Then the Lord my God will come, and the holy ones with him. I don't think that has happened. I mean, that's plain. And that's the funny part, too. If you look at, what was it, 66 and 134? I wrote this crap down. I moved it. But 66 and 134, they rose up. And it led to this process. And they were utterly destroyed. Utterly destroyed. But when you read verse 5, and you sit there in 12:5, then the clans of Judah shall say to themselves, the inhabitants of Jerusalem have strength through the Lord host their God. And you read verse 9, and on that day I will seek to destroy all the nations that come against Jerusalem. And then you see the reference to Megiddo in verse 11. If God's seeking out to destroy everyone that comes against Jerusalem in 70 AD, he really didn't fare too well, did he? And when I believe it'll be Jesus, and they're using that metaphoric language because obviously God was not actually on a field like in the day of battle fighting people. But when Christ comes, it's going to be an earth-shattering event. There might be an earthquake. I don't know. It could be a literal thing. The earth, well, at least that area, could shake, and people will flee like in the days of Uzziah. And that hasn't happened. People were not terrified of God in 70 AD. And like I said, if God seek to destroy all the nations that came against Jerusalem in 70 AD, which was supposed to happen, he did not fare well at all. Jerusalem was annihilated. People run out. And then they slowly trickle back in, and they try it again about 50 years later and get hosed again. So I think that's very problematic. Zechariah 12 and Zechariah 14. There's no way that this has happened. And then, he will come with his holy ones with him. There's like telling you in the expectation of seeing it. You're going to understand what's happening. At least the Christian, whatever you want to call it, the believers, when the time of this prophecy being fulfilled. But like I said, verse 9 is really an insult then. Because if he's seeking to destroy all them people, he really did a bad job. Titus and his bunch just crushed him. And if God was there, like in the day of battle, it's, you know what I mean? It doesn't make any sense. Then we go on in verse 6. On that day there shall be no light, cold, or frost, and there shall be a unique day, which is known to the Lord, neither day nor night, but at evening time there shall be light. On that day waters shall flow out of Jerusalem, half of them to the eastern sea and half of them to the western sea. It shall continue in summer as in winter. And the Lord will be king over all the earth. On that day the Lord will be one and his name one. And like I said, if this is a more literal sense, and that's what you have to do, you have to utterly spiritualize everything and just reinterpret it. But I'd say at least it's safe to take verse 9 very literally, that he will be king over all the earth. And when you're king over all the earth, you rule it, and people do what you want them to do. Was God not king over all the earth before? I mean, we got to stop and think about this. Does Paul kind of say that the earth is ruled by someone else right now? And as a Unitarian, it should make a lot more sense, because when all these things take place, the man, Jesus, turns over the creation which was given to Adam back to God. You see how that works? Creation was given to man, and all the angels, all these people around in the heavenly places, they're watching God. And God is a being of his word. And that's why Jesus had to be a man. It had to be a man that gives it back. And in that day, God will be the king of all the earth. You see, there's a transaction that takes place, but there's some very physical understanding here that should be heeded, to say the least. And then just some other things when you take a look at, and these are not as strong to me, so I'm not putting these on the same playing field as the other points. But if you take a look at Matthew 24:15, and when you see the abomination of desolation spoken by the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. Now, I went looking deeper into the Greek text, and from what I can tell, that phrase is there. Let the reader understand. So now we got to start paying attention to dating issues. And it just depends where you go with it. Okay? There's there's reasonable cases to be made in all directions, but if you take a gentleman by the name of Felix Just, he is a PhD, and he puts the Gospel of Mark in the late 60s or the early 70s, and he does this because of the references to the Jewish War, 66 through 70. That would force Matthew and Luke to come later, and that would put him between the 70s and 80s. And then Luke is even considered usually later than Matthew, which would put him in the 80s. And then he splits up the Gospel of John and says the main edition was finished in the 90s, the early edition was finished in the 50s possibly, and the epilogue was added in the hundreds. So the real problem would be with Matthew. If Matthew was written past 70 AD, there's something not making sense now. And like I said, these points aren't as strong because we really just can't prove for most of these books when they were written. You'll find that the Gospel of Matthew, some people want to push it into the 40s, and I do not think that is true. I think between 70 and 110, based on quotations, and you got Mark coming in between 60 and 70. Some people put Luke between 60 and 90, and that puts John between 80 and 95. There's no doubt John was later than the other Gospels. Okay, no doubt at all. Paul was the first writer, and some people struggle to put him in the 40s, but if we just take the 50s as his starting point, and he writes up through the 60s, and he was before the Gospels, so that at least seems to make sense. Another brief point is some people in preterism like to say in Matthew 24:14 that the world strictly means the Greek inhabited world. I found this point not to be quite true. It's like the morphe thing. And when you start looking at the word and the Thayers and the vines and you compare it, it can mean the world. It could be taken either way. So, I'm not pushing this point too hard because it's one of them things. I can't necessarily prove it. So, but taking a look at Revelations chapter 11, I did go and look at the various views on this. And the thing that kind of just blows my mind when you think about Daniel and then you read Revelation 11 is the two witnesses. And what I found is that the view over the two witnesses in Revelation 11 is all over the place. You would really have to speak to a singular person and see what view they hold to. It goes from the Ten Commandments to Jesus having a 3.5 year ministries and using the tense in the Greek for the singular word body, which is a terrible argument, and to prove that was actually one person. Excuse me. And, well, I'm not going to get into that. I don't think the 3.5 year ministry thing even adds up by itself in either case. But so what they do is say Jesus came once and then he came a second time, and since the word body is used and it's a singular form that they say in that tense, that means it's the same person. So Jesus had a ministry for 3.5 years during 70 AD apparently. But this argument falls apart, namely the use of the plural throughout when speaking of chapter 11 also mentions Jesus, and it does not link him to the two witnesses. It also says they will be dead. This is found in the Greek text for 3.5 days. So it seems the preterists will have a hard time fitting that belief into this text. And still others say it was a sign in the sky. So they are literally all over the place on this one. Obviously to me, they all fall apart because it's one of those more literal things. People are supposed to see these dead guys, and it just, I think it's an issue. And I'll leave you with this, and this will give you a little bit more of the historical context for primarily John. That becomes kind of the beef of the whole thing. Um, but I'm gonna start out with a quote from Robert Mounce, who is he is a very highly respected Greek teacher. Doesn't make him right or wrong, but he's not just some quack out of left field. He's been in the game a long time. The major problem with the preterist position is that the decisive victory portrayed in the latter chapters of the Apocalypse was never achieved. It is difficult to believe that John envisioned anything less than the complete overthrow of Satan, the final destruction of evil, and the eternal reign of God. If this is not to be, then either the seer was essentially wrong in the major thrust of his message, or his work was so helplessly ambiguous that the first recipients were all led astray. And then it goes on into some other things. Futurists acknowledge, and I'm not pushing the futurist position, this is a good article to point out some of the weaknesses of preterism. I'm not saying you got to be a futurist or a historicist or an idealist. I'm not saying any of that. I'm simply saying listen to some of the facts. Futurists acknowledge the use of figures and symbols. When figurative language is used, one must look at the context to find the meaning. However, figurative language does not justify allegorical interpretation. Futurists contend that the literal interpretation of Revelation finds its roots in the ancient church fathers. Elements of this teaching, such as future millennial kingdom, are found in the writings of Clement of Rome, coming from 96 AD, Justin the Martyr, coming in AD 100 to 165, Irenaeus 115 to 202, Tertullian 150 to 225 AD, and others. Futurists hold that the church fathers taught a literal interpretation of Revelation until Origen in 185 and between 185 and 254 introduced allegorical interpretation. Now remember, this is also going to be the first guy that really put forward the subordinate view that Jesus was pre-existent. So that's who they're talking about. This then became the popular form of interpretation when taught by Augustine in 354 and through 430. Literal interpretation of Revelation remained throughout the history of the church and rose again to prominence in the modern era. The futurist view is wildly popular among evangelical Christians today. One of the most popular versions on futurist teaching is dispensational theology, promoted by such schools as the Dallas Theological Seminary, the Moody Bible Institute. Theologians such as Charles Ryer, John Walverwood, and Dwight Pentecost are noted scholars of this position. Tim LaHaye made this theology popular in the culture with his End Time series of novels. Unfortunately, there have been and continue to be popular preachers who mistakenly apply a futurist approach to connect current events to the symbols in Revelation. Some have been involved in setting dates on Christ's return. Although their writings have been popular, they do not represent a biblical futurist view. Critics of this view argue that the futurist view renders the book irrelevant to the original readers of the first century. Another criticism is that Revelation is apocalyptic literature and thus meant to be interpreted allegorically or symbolically rather than literally. Hake Hanegraaff states, thus when a Bible writer uses a symbol or an allegory, we do violence to his intentions if we interpret it strictly in a literal manner. One of the key elements in this debate, particularly between preterists and futurists, is the date of the writing for Revelation. Preterists argue for a pre-AD 70 date, while futurists hold to a date of AD 95. There are several reasons for a later date. First, Irenaeus, in his work against heresy, states that John wrote Revelation at the end of Emperor Domitian's reign. which ended in AD 96. Irenaeus was a disciple of Polycarp, who was a disciple of John the Apostle, who thus had a connection with the contemporary of the Apostle John. Second, the condition of the seven churches in Revelation appear to describe a second-generation church setting rather than the first. For example, the church of Ephesus in Revelations 2:1-7 is charged with abandoning their first love and warned against the Nicolaitans heresy. If John had written Revelation in AD 65, it would have overlapped with Paul's letters to the Ephesians and Timothy. However, Paul makes no mention of either a loss of their first love or a threat from the Nicolaitans. Ephesus was Paul's headquarters for 3 years, and Apollos served there along with Aquila and Priscilla. The church in Smyrna did not exist during Paul's ministry from 60 to 64, as recorded by Polycarp, the first bishop of the city. Laodicea, yeah, I just want to go to sleep. Revelation 3:14-22 is rebuked for being wealthy and lukewarm. However, in his letter to the Colossians, Paul commends the church 3 times, 2:2, 4:13, and verse 16. It would likely take more than 3 years for the church to decline to the point that chapter 3 would state there to be no commendable aspect about it. Also, an earthquake in AD 61 left the city in ruin for many years. Thus, it is likely that the ruined condition, John would describe them as rich. Excuse me. Let me go back. Thus, it is unlikely that in a ruined condition, John would describe them as rich. Preterists who favor the AD 70 date pose the question, why doesn't John mention the fall of the temple which occurred in AD 70? Futurists respond that John wrote about future events and the destruction of the temple was some 25 years in the past. He also wrote to a Gentile audience in Asia Minor, which was far removed from Jerusalem. Preterists also point out the fact that the temple is mentioned in chapter 11. Futurists respond that although John mentions a temple in Revelation 11:1-2, that does not mean it exists at the time of his writing. In Daniel 9:26-27 and Ezekiel 40-48, chapters 40-48, both prophets described the temple, but it was not in existence when they described a future temple in their writings. What did Jesus mean in Matthew 24:34 when he said, "This generation will certainly not pass away until all these things have happened"? The common futurist response is that Jesus, stating the future generation about which he was speaking, would not pass away once these things had begun. In other words, the generation living amid the time of the events predicted would not pass away until it had all been fulfilled. So I'm going to stop there. Like I said, I'll probably end up doing one on Gog and Magog, because to me that's the other big piece of this, what is supposed to happen after Gog and Magog get into it, who they might be. But a war of that magnitude has not happened yet. And so that's it. This is just a negative case for preterism. I'm not trying to prove a point. I'm not saying that you need to believe this futurist article insert that I read. I just wanted to point out some facts and what some of the arguments are, the inconsistencies between them. But so that's that. And like I said, when I get some more time, I'll probably take a look at Gog and Magog, because I think that's the other leg of this that's really important to understand. God bless.